Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to begin looking at another market structure. This one is monopoly. And we will be looking at trying to identify how a monopolist determines the profit maximizing price and quantity. And we'll also have an eye towards identifying whether a monopolist is earning an economic profit or a loss. And we'll compare how that monopolist outcome of price and quantity compares to a perfectly competitive firm. So quickly, a reminder that monopoly is a market structure that has only one firm, and that firm is producing a unique product because no other firm is producing what they have. And that means that there are many barriers to entry, things that are stopping another firm from entering in. It could be a trademark or a copyright. Could be a patent. There is something keeping other firms from being able to do what this one firm is able to do. So example might be a pharmaceutical company that has developed a drug or a treatment that addresses a particular illness. So if Merck, a pharmaceutical company, develops a vaccine that prevents lung cancer, then they will earn or file for patent protection. They will have a medicine that nobody else can produce for a certain number of years, and they will have a monopoly in the treatment of lung cancer for a period of time, just as an example. With monopoly, the optimal output rule will remain the same. Whether it's monopoly, perfect competition, it doesn't matter. In all of economics, the optimal decision-making rule is always to continue whatever behavior you're doing until marginal cost and marginal revenue are equal, because that is the last place where you're able to not be harmed. You've been adding to total profit at MC equals MR. You've stopped adding, but you're not taking away. So that's where we will stop. So that rule will apply now, as it did in perfect competition, and as it will for everything else in all of economics. When we looked at perfect competition, demand was horizontal because there were many firms all producing the exact same thing. Therefore, there is a market price set by the market that every firm needs to obey. But in monopoly, the firm is the market. So the market demand curve for a monopolist is downward sloping, just like the demand curve is in the industry for perfectly competitive firms. And because it's downward sloping, that has an impact on the relationship between price and marginal revenue. In perfect competition, price and marginal revenue are the same. But in monopoly, they will be different. It turns out that perfect competition, they're the same, but in monopoly, price will be greater than marginal revenue. The reason why is because if you think back to our discussion about elasticity, we talked about how total revenue changes as you move down the demand curve. As you move down the demand curve from the elastic portion to the inelastic portion. And we said back then that as you're in the elastic portion, if price drops, total revenue increases. That increase gets smaller as we move down the demand curve. There eventually comes a point where we're at unit elastic and where marginal revenue does not change. It's zero. And once we get to the inelastic portion, then we said as the price drops, we begin to see a loss in total revenue. And so we know that marginal revenue is decreasing as we move down the demand curve. And so price and marginal revenue will be different. Price will always be greater than marginal revenue because we are losing some money due to the price effect, gaining some because of the quantity effect, which means the price and marginal revenue will be different. And you can see that in this table. As the price goes down, total revenue is changing. And that change in total revenue, known as the marginal revenue, is always less than the price. And we talked about this previously. The reason why total revenue rises and falls is because of that price effect. Every good that, if I'm, say, raising the price, I'm getting more money for every good that I sell. That's the price effect. But I'm losing money because I'm selling fewer products due to the increase in price. And so depending on which of these two effects is greatest will impact total revenue. If you need a refresher, I would go back to our conversation about elasticity to get that foundation again. So monopoly markets have a downward sloping demand curve, and they have a marginal revenue curve that is also downward sloping and falls inside of the demand curve. And that's how you will draw every single monopoly. You'll then need to overlay the cost curves that we talked about in previous lessons, the marginal cost curve and the average total cost curve, to see whether the monopolist has a profit or a loss. Keep in mind, again, the optimal output rule remains the same. Marginal cost equals marginal revenue. That's what will be the optimal point for us that will maximize our profit. So we'll draw the demand curve downward sloping marginal revenue curve inside of demand. We'll overlay the marginal cost and average total cost curve, and this will be what monopolies graphs will look like. And we will analyze them exactly the same way that we did with perfect competition. We will find where MC equals MR, and that will help us determine the price, and we'll compare that price to ATC to see if we have a profit or a loss. So if this were our profit and loss or monopoly graph, we'd find where MC equals MR, and that gives me my quantity. And this is the tricky part. This MC equals MR is just a point. It helps direct us in the direction we want to go, but it doesn't in and of itself mean a heck of a lot. It just tells us where to go. So MC equals MR, down to find the quantity, and then I ask myself, what are people willing to pay at that quantity? So I will draw a vertical line straight up, and I will see where it hits the demand curve. That's the willingness to pay that people have, and so I will charge what people are willing to pay. So where the demand curve and the quantity intersect, that is our price. And I look and see where at this optimal quantity I've hit average total cost. In this case, average total cost is less than demand, less than price. And so there is a profit here for the monopolist. So again, find MC equals MR, go down to find the Q, draw a vertical line, and see where that vertical line hits the demand curve and where it hits the ATC curve. If the price is greater than ATC, we have a profit. If price was somehow less than ATC, we'd have a loss. In this case, we have a positive economic profit. Now we can compare this outcome to perfect competition to see how the existence of a monopoly affects the overall price and quantity of the market. So the monopolist, MC equals MR, would be producing at a quantity of Q2 and a price of P3, because that is the price people are willing to pay for a quantity of Q2. In perfect competition, the industry in perfect competition always produces where supply and demand intersect. And so in a previous lesson I said the marginal cost curve is the supply curve for individual firms, and that you would be in good shape and be well served to put MC equals S every time you draw cost curves. So if you did that, you would see that a perfectly competitive industry would be producing at a point at which quantity would be Q3 and the price would be P6, because that is where supply and demand, marginal cost and demand curves intersect. We can make some generalizations about monopoly and perfect competition. One is that monopolists will produce less than a perfectly competitive industry will. That the monopolist will reduce total output relative to what perfectly competitive industries would have. Monopolists will also charge a higher price than in perfect competition. In perfect competition, price equals marginal cost. But in monopoly, we found MC equals MR and found that price is greater than marginal revenue, which means the prices in a monopoly will always be greater than marginal cost. Anytime a firm can charge a price greater than marginal cost, they have price setting power. And so monopolists, because of their price setting power, will charge a higher price than what perfectly competitive firms in industry would, because in perfect competition, the firm is stuck with whatever the market price is. We should also know that monopolists will earn an economic profit in the long run. Economic profit will be greater than zero because there are massive barriers to entry. They are doing better than their next best alternative, and it turns out their next best alternative cannot enter in and compete the profit away. So monopolies will always have fewer products at a higher price, and there will always be economic profit for monopolists who operate. There will also then be dead weight loss. Remember that dead weight loss is essentially an arrow pointing from the quantity we are producing at and pointing to the quantity we would like to produce at, or pointing to the efficient quantity. And so the monopolist produces less than perfect competition. And so we find where we are, MC equals demand is where we want to be. And so we find this red triangle. And that area represents the lost surplus that is generated because monopolists are able to charge a higher price. We'll talk more about monopoly next time, particularly how government may choose to regulate monopolies, and I will talk to you then.